And hello, everyone, and welcome to Learn a Trade channel. I am Kevin Tate, and today we're going to get into Cornelius-Nitro Pro Mini. This is part of the full service training, so this is some very good training that Cornelius put out, and I hope you like it.
Okay, in this next segment, I want to talk about the mixing block and the Sparger that's in the pump deck and the injection of the nitrogen into the drink. First of all, of course, we got to remove our pump deck, as we explained before. Now, on this pump deck, you can see in the back here the mixing block, and this is where the Sparger is located. This is the mixing block assembly that I've taken out. And this is a Sparger. Now, how this works is coming from the back of the unit, as we mentioned before, that water solenoid is controlling the water flow rate at 1 ounce per second. That comes into one of the barb fittings. The peristaltic pump that's pumping that concentrate at whatever ratio it is, the RPMs of the motor, is coming into the other fitting. The water and the concentrate go in, they come into this white plastic mixing block where they mix together, and you got a finished drink. Now, if you pull the left side handle, you're just going to get a plain cold brew drink that comes out of this barb fitting, comes up to the left side of the unit. There's a solenoid that gets energized. It comes into the mixing chamber, and then, of course, in the nozzle and out into the cup. Now, for the nitro drinks, what is going on there is in the back of the unit and the pump deck, there's a Sparger that's screwed. We call this a Sparger. You can call it an injector. And what I want to think about here is think about a fish tank. And everybody's seen the nylon piece of tubing, vinyl piece of tubing going down with the stone on the end, and that stone sits there and bubbles out gas. Well, we're going to pump the gas into this fitting, and it's going to bubble out that tip. Now, the air that we took from the compressor, we filtered it at 5 microns, and then we filtered it again at 1 micron. That air comes in. The air that is out of the air that we breathe, again, is 78% nitrogen. Well, that clean, ultra-filtered air enters into the back and comes out the end of the tip of the Sparger here. Now, how this works is when this solenoid opens up and drinks start pouring out the nozzle and all of that, the mixed product in the mixing block is allowed to go through this chamber. This is inside the chamber. As the product flows around the tip of the Sparger, what is going on is the gas injects out of here because the dynamic flow is lower in the mixing area here, in this aluminum block. The dynamic flowing pressure is less than the regulated pressure here. It's a couple of pounds PSI, and it injects the nitrogen into the drink and then comes on out. Okay? This nitrogen, what's important about this Sparger here is this tip has to be maintained and cleaned. At least once a week, the machine should be cleaned with a cold brew cleaner. In our manual, it's suggested that we use Clearly Cold by Ernix, and that product will go in and dissolve the coffee residue that builds up on the tip of the Sparger so that you always get a good flow of gas coming on out. In this next segment, I'm going to talk about the air compressor assembly located in the back left-hand corner of the unit. This is the assembly that pulls in the air and it compresses it, filters it, and brings it to the front of the unit to be injected into the drink. The air that we're breathing right now is 78% nitrogen, and it's that nitrogen in the air that we're going to inject into the drink to get that nitro drink. Now, how this is done is in the back of the machine, there's a couple of screws you take on out from the sheet metal framework, and with a little bit of wiggling and jiggling, this whole pump assembly can come out and hang to the side. Now, I want to point out some of the components here. This is a pressure switch. This switch cycles the compressor, the air compressor on and off at 60 to 80 psi, on and off. It's just an open or a closed switch. This is a pressure relief valve that is unreleases itself at 90 psi. And as you notice, there's a nice aluminum box in there. That's the air box where the compressed air is stored and held. Now, the air compressor itself. This is a little mini air compressor. You can see the 24 volts DC coming into the unit. On top of the air compressor is a little thermal disc. That's the two white wires and that disc strapped on there. If this compressor gets too hot, and if you're familiar with air compressors, the discharge air on air compressors can get kind of warm, the discharge line. And so, as protection, there's a little thermal disc on here. If the compressor gets too hot, that'll just turn it off, and when it cools down, it'll reset again. But where the air compressor pulls the air in is right here. It's a little intake port. That intake port has a filter in there that is 5 microns of filtration. As the air gets sucked into the compressor, it gets out. And it goes into the air box. Let me show you here. It goes into the air box. In the air box, as the pressure builds up, when it gets to 80 psi, the pressure switch cuts the 24 volts DC to the compressor. It cycles off. As you're using the compressed air to make drinks, the pressure drops down to 60 psi. The compressor comes back on again. Now, along with this thermal disc, on the shell of the compressor itself is another thermal disc that's clipped on there. This is the discharge line out of the air compressor. This is also a safety device, and it's a thermal disc that if the discharge line gets too warm from running extended long time, something, maybe a switch went bad or something like that. Anyway, this will trip and cut the power to the compressor also. So there's 2 safety means to shut the compressor down if it gets too hot. Now, one last thing here to show you, and I'm going to turn this assembly around. Like I said, it's pretty tight in there. And on the back side of this plate is a little 4 amp circuit breaker. If that compressor, the air compressor I just showed you, if that gets too high in the amp draw, it'll trip at 4 amps and shut the compressor off. And this is a manual reset. It's not an automatic. You have to physically take the assembly out and reset the switch. But a word of warning here is that if this is tripped, just resetting it and going again isn't a good idea, because this tripped for a reason. It got to 4 amps and it tripped. Now we need to do some troubleshooting. Why is the compressor drawing that much amperage? Okay. Another thing about this also is you'll see the discharge line coming out. Here's coming out of the compressor, comes around, stainless steel line, comes back. This is the air box that is pushing the air into the air box. This is an output that's a John Guest fitting. This John Guest fitting goes up, and you'll see this little inline air filter here. Now this filter is, if you look closely on it, it's directional. It says flow. So when this gets replaced once a year at your annual PM, you got to make sure you get it in the right flow. But what this air filter does, you remember this compressor, when took the air in, it filtered it to 5 microns. The discharge of this air going up to the cabinet to be mixed with the drink, this filter is filtering it down to 1 micron. That makes that air consumable. And then that air goes around and the back of the unit, and of course that line goes then into the inside cabinet to the pump platform.